Jim?
This is a video of myself and Barbara um, about what it means to be called to work with the weather through ceremony. And oh, I have to look at the wrong camera. There we go. Okay, still too bright in the background. There we go. Okay. Well, now I've got really okay. Yeah, that's what I'll do. Turn. Okay, so the purpose of this video is it's an interview between myself and Barbara about what it means and how to work with the different spirits of the weather, to work with the weather. And it's not a lot of people that are called to do that. You don't just choose to do it. It's something that the spirits come to you and gift you and help you to work with the weather. So I'm going to ask Barbara first about why she feels that she's being directed by spirit to use ceremony to work with the weather. Okay, Barbara?
Okay. I made the experience now the fourth time. I think the fourth time, yes. That when I ask for weather because of needing of classes or something, it came this way. The first time it was 2019, and I was really astonishing about it. We did it in the class that we ask for stopping of rain. And as soon as we finished the little morning ceremony, it stopped to rain. And I didn't know, I had no weather forecast or something like this seen, so it stopped. The second time, it was during another ceremony when we did the water ceremony. And I asked for that stopping rain, it stopped. Also, then with Jim, we worked with the fifth wind, with the whirlwind, and it was in the weather forecast very bad, and it was very good afterwards for a few days. And now it was the fifth time in the class, and the weather forecast was very, very bad, all only rain. And I asked for specific no rain and sunshine between 11 and 2 o'clock, and it came really like between 11 and 2 o'clock. We had no rain and the sun came out. And at 5, it started again to, no, at 2:30, it started again to rain. So I was wondering after this experience if I would have the possibility to work with the weather. And this was the reason I asked you of advice.
Okay. Well, it's a lot like what happened to me probably, I'll say 25 years ago. I started having situations where I was doing a pipe ceremony and the weather would change. for that. And it was really interesting because at that time I thought, oh, I'm controlling the weather, which is not true. What happens is there are spiritual forces that control the weather. For instance, you mentioned the fifth wind. Briefly, the fifth wind is of the four directional winds that were born and given responsibility, the spirits that were given responsibility of like the north wind, the south wind, the east wind, the west wind. There was one more baby boy born in the spirit realm in the sky nations, and he didn't want to be confined to just one direction. And so the Great Mystery put him in charge of the fifth wind. So there's the north, east, south, and west winds. That's the four direction winds. And then there's the fifth wind. And the fifth wind doesn't have an assigned direction. Instead, it's the whirlwind. It can form as a dust devil, where the dust is spinning around like in a little mini tornado. And that's what Barbara and I experienced at the last time I was over there with the class we had. But it can be as big as a hurricane. You'll notice that those winds, those hurricanes and tornadoes go in a counterclockwise direction, not clockwise. And that's why they're so destructive, because they're undoing things. The power of the fifth wind is to undo things. That's one of it. It's been my experience that the fifth wind picks people like Barbara. And for some reason, in the last 10 years, I found that the fifth wind has picked all women. I can't remember any men that the fifth wind has picked to work with. And what that means is you develop a relationship, a communication with that spiritual entity that we call the fifth wind. And it communicates to us and tells us through physical signs or other ways when we're supposed to do a ceremony with the fifth wind, because the fifth wind wants to do something. Now, perfect example is when Barbara and I were walking back from lunch, I believe, in Ammersee, Germany. The forecast was for several days of cold and rain, and one of the activities of the class was to spend an entire night out with a fire, a campfire, a sacred fire, all by themselves, not all together as a group, but individually, where they could see each other's fires. And we were concerned about that because it was going to be cold and wet and probably windy. And as we were walking back, we came around a corner and there was a whirlwind that picked up a bunch of leaves and debris and spun them around, well, this way, spun them around and spun them around. And I said, whoa, looks like the fifth wind wants to work with us about the weather. Now notice that it's the spirit, whether it's the fifth wind, one of the four directions, whether it's the thunder beings, whether it's Cloud Nation, or whether it's one of the biggest powers that works with weather is Grandmother Ocean. But anyhow, not to get too far away from that, the fifth wind made a sign by sending this whirlwind up almost in our face. So when we got back to Barbara's place, we went outside and we took a braid of sweetgrass and we burned it, and we tried to keep it burning, because the whole time you're burning the sweetgrass, you have to keep relighting it unless there's wind. While we burned it, and we called on the spirit of the fifth wind and said, could you help us with the weather? We didn't say, make it not rain or make it warm or sunny. We didn't get specific with it. And that's really important. You want to let the fifth wind or the thunder beings or whoever, and the fifth wind is one of the thunder beings, you want to let them tell us what they want to, what we should ask them to do. And it wasn't right at that moment, but we did a pipe ceremony down by the lake. And I remember being told, watch the changes of the weather, or really watch for unusual things in the weather. And by the time we got up and we did that little request with the smoke of the sweetgrass, there was like a light rain came down, And a very unusual occurrence, at least for me, was that there was the sands from, I think it was from
Sahara.
the Sahara Desert, all the way down there, and we're up in the mountains of Bavaria, and it pulled that sandstorm that was blowing across Europe down, and the air, not the sky, but the air turned yellow. I'd never seen anything like that, but it was obviously a major change in the weather, and it was a sign for me and for Barbara that, you know, the prayers were heard, and the fifth wind would then help us. Now, again, it wasn't that we wanted we wanted the warm weather, but we weren't asking specifically for no rain and stuff. But that's what the fifth wind wanted to do. So we ended up, the whole class was amazing, beautiful out, sunny, warm. And the night that it was supposed to rain and be so cold, that night it didn't rain. And even though the temperatures got cold, everything was dry. They could keep their fires going. And it turned into a very powerful event.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember right, after that class was done, the cold rain came back.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, and Barbara, from your perspective, do you want to add anything to that example?
No, this was exactly what you described.
Mm-hmm.
When I did it, I even did no pipe ceremony. We only smudged and sing songs in
Yeah.
the group, and the wind was there. This I recognized every time. Wind, it was wind coming, not the whirlwind, other winds.
Uh-huh. Just regular wind. Yeah.
Mhm.
There's a lot of ways that the spirits, and I would call the spirits that work with the weather kind of the equivalent of, instead of being like angels, they're like archangels. They carry a lot of responsibility. So I don't think I said it at the time, but after the fifth wind honored our ceremony, I really felt that Barbara would become someone who would be working with the weather. But I didn't want to say much about it because she needed more experiences. And again, to go back to one of the basics, when we're working with the spirits in ceremony, all we're doing is we're adding the human energy that we create with our thoughts and our minds and maybe the songs or whatever. And the energy from that is then used by the spiritual entities, we'll just say the thunder beings, to create weather. And it's been my experience that when we let the spirits call us into the ceremony, and then we add our human dimension to it, we are just as important as the spirits, but we don't control it. We just do our part. And with that, I've got several recordings about the Hopi people, the Hopi Nation, which is a Native American nation in Arizona, that it's very, very small, only a few thousand people. But they are very powerful in their ceremonies. There's special dances they do once a month, spring, summer, and fall. And then they rest during the winter to bring rain for the crops in the middle of the desert where they live. And I've witnessed their ceremonies, their dances, where I'm talking really desert, like really desert. It's a place called Second Mesa, First Mesa. And I've witnessed big black thunderclouds come from, because you're way up high on a mesa overlooking the clear desert. So from over 100 miles away, come right over to the village and stop above the village and just pour rain down on them. And even the Navajo, which is the neighboring tribe, consider the Hopi the rain makers. Now, the Hopi won't say they make rain. And what I learned from a Hopi elder who recently passed away, Uncle Floyd, who actually made this ring for me. I'll see if we can get a good, clear picture of this. I had a dream about this ring. Those are bear paw prints on it. Mm-hmm. And he was the head Magua or medicine man of the Antelope Kiva Society of one of the villages. And when he passed away, I did the crossing over ceremony. I know this sounds like I'm not talking about weather, but it's part of it. He explained to me quite a few years ago how the whole rain system works with the Hopi and how they're able to bring regular, soft, gentle, what's called female rain. It's not downpours, but it's a long soaking rain that helps the crops. And their main crop is corn. You've all probably seen the blue corn chips, tortilla chips. Those are from the Hopi. That's their particular corn that they grew. And how the big chip companies can make billions of these bags of chips now out of this little tiny group of people. They basically stole the corn. Anyhow, so back to how does this relate to weather? He explained to me there's like the cycle of evaporation. The sun beats down on water. It evaporates into steam and goes up to the sky, condenses because of the cold air into clouds, and then when it condenses enough, it falls back to the ground in the form of liquid rain. Well, in the spiritual sense, when the Hopi do these dances that they've done the same day, the same time, same month, same way for over 1,000 years, maybe even longer, when they do these dances, it creates an energy through their songs and their dance, their physical dance and their prayers. And it sends this energy, just like the vapor of the evaporated water, up to a mountain about 125 miles away from there, where the spirit beings of the Hopi people, the Katsinas, live there. And they literally collect, and this is a template for how we can work with the weather ourselves. They collect the energy of the songs and dances and they put it into the mountain. And these are beings that I've seen. I've actually worked with one of these Katsinas before and had tremendous results to put out a forest fire with rain and change of wind direction, all these things. All those things were told to me by the Katsina. This is what you need to ask for. Anyhow, and this is, Barbara's very patient. She's heard all this. But this is just to form an idea of how we humans work with the spiritual realm and nature to create changes in the weather. Now, it can be, there's too much rain. I'll talk about that in a little bit too. But anyhow, the energy from the prayers from the humans goes up, is collected by the Kachinas and put into the ground of the mountain. And I've actually seen where this happens, and I've seen they're called cloud seeds or rain seeds that come out like a little round cloud out of the ground. But it's not a mist. It's an actual, almost solid looking little cloud. And they come out and puff, 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 and they go up to the clouds, the actual cloud ceiling, and they impregnate the clouds with all the ability to bring the rain. So there's the Katsinas, there's the mountain, there's the cloud seeds, then there's the cloud nation, which is as we've learned with a woman's water song ceremony, water is not just a resource. Water is a living entity, a being. So this living entity of the cloud nation takes that moisture out over 125 miles to the village where the dance is going on and sends the rain down. And that completes the cycle. So we humans play a very important role in this cycle. The Katsinas play a very important role. The mountain plays a very important role, etc. So without all of us working together, no rain, or the rain is really destructive and hard. So once we understand, and there's the Cherokee word, or it's part of a song, Wende Ya Ho, and ho means it is so, not aho, that's Lakota, but ho. Wende Ya means we humans are an integral, indispensable part of the great mystery or God or creation. So it acknowledges that we humans play an indispensable role in the creation of things. So when we bring that back to working with the weather, it would be a really good thing for somebody who feels called by the circumstances and events in their life. And I'll mention one other thing that calls you, to start working on developing a communication relationship with whatever spirit it is that has shown itself to you. Now, obviously, Barbara has been shown by the fifth wind, but I know her pipe has the power of the thunder beings as well. So I believe Barbara will be working with a range of the spirits. And don't neglect Grandmother Ocean, because she's like the top head spirit that creates weather. And I only learned that at my daughter's wedding in Costa Rica 6 years ago or 7 years ago. So,
but it was, for me, it was interesting that I had a need for it. And it was not that I was called from the spirits. I came from the need and I was heard. So under this perspective, what you say, it's more interesting to know or to hear to the calling.
well,
how can you say, or what is an obvious calling?
Okay. First off, the way we humans work, the way we think, is we see a need and we pray or do ceremony or ask for help. That's the normal way that we do that. And that's like one of the beginning steps. The spirits know that we have a need and they're already working on it, but they wait until they encourage you to ask. And you, like you specifically said, from 11 to 2 or whatever that was. Mm-hmm. So that, I believe, was inspired by the spirit of probably the fifth wind. When I was up on the mountain and had the Katsina come and the big forest fire was going, I basically just called on the help. And the Katsina appeared physically to me. It was about 12, 13 feet tall. And it spoke, what do they call it? Telepathically into my mind and said, here's what you ask for. You ask for the wind to reverse and blow the fire back onto itself. You ask for a big drop in temperature, like a big drop of temperature, because heat plays a big part in forest fires. And then call on all the directions to get rain to come there. Now, there was no rain forecast. I did that prayer up on top of the mountain that was on fire. And that night, when I went back down to the valley and I was camping, that night, the temperature dropped 20 degrees Fahrenheit. That's big. It's huge. The winds blew in the cold air and they blew the fire back on itself. And clouds came from all the different directions and hovered over the mountain and poured rain. Before the weather started, the fire was only 10% contained by the firefighters. By the time the next morning came around, the fire was 90% contained by natural causes. Now, I didn't know that I should ask for those things. I just wanted to rain. But to address your question about hearing a calling, very often, especially the thunder beings, will give you a dream, a very powerful dream. And in the dream, there might be tornadoes, there might be lightning bolts and strikes. There might be dreams of just really severe, intense storms. And what I found is when you have dreams like that, that's the thunder beings calling you to wake up a little bit and say, hey, we want you to work with us. We need a human being to do the human part. Would you work with us? Mm-hmm. And the other way is to be struck by lightning.
And I don't need this.
That's why we pay attention to the dreams. Usually if people ignore the dreams, that's when they get struck real close by with lightning. And you know her from our Zoom meetings, but Kat Dutton, she's in Colorado now, she has one of the black thunder pipes. And she didn't have it at the time, but she called me up And I had made this pipe for somebody in Arizona, a black thunder pipe, and I didn't know who it was supposed to go to. So she calls me up, and she's one of my pipe students, or was. She's a teacher now, and she says, "Jim, I'm really afraid. I think the thunder beings are trying to kill me." I said, "Well, what happened?" And she said, "I was going out the house, and because there was a big thunderstorm, I shut off certain lights and unplugged some things. And when I went out, I pushed the button on the garage door opener and then went out. And as soon as the car got out into the street, there was a big bolt of lightning hit her house. And of course, she tried to go into the garage door opener wouldn't work. She went through the front door, went in, and everything she had touched, every light switch, everything she had unplugged, were black and blown out. The switches, the plugs from the lightning strike. So she was obviously nervous about, what are the thunder beings doing? I said, well, they're telling me that you're the one that's supposed to have the thunder pipe. And she
Mhm.
the thunders ever since. And I will tell you this, she has not only worked with the Hopi, with Uncle Floyd, she and her children were adopted into the Hopi Nation, as well as Uncle Floyd's family. And they were adopted in a ceremony inside one of the kivas, which is an underground place of spiritual ceremony, which is very unusual. And she has been very powerful with that little, about that long, little black thunder pipe. And she would hear clearly when she's supposed to take it with her, and her travels of her work took her all over Arizona. And when she was told to take the pipe, she would travel around and the rain would follow her. When she was told one time not to take the pipe, she went around and the rain still followed her. And the lesson that comes from that is kind of an advanced concept. But I teach to my pipe students that you are not the power, the pipe is the power, the connection. But there comes a time where that is a teaching for grade school, and you graduate into a higher education. The same month that she was told not to take the thunder pipe with her, and she went around, did prayers and ceremonies, and still the rain was there. I went to Australia, specifically paid for by a government hydrologist, to study the effect of the black thunder pipe on the weather of Australia. And for 30 days, I showed up, I didn't have the pipe with me. I was told to leave it at home. And the teaching I got was, you are the pipe. So as a pipe works with the pipe over the years, there comes a point where you become the pipe itself, or it becomes you.
Yeah. What is important to look after when I'm say, hey spirits, I will work with you. Just tell me when you need me. I will get on duty for you and for the spirit or the world.
Right. First off, one of the things I've learned is when you first start working with the weather, you have the responsibility to work on the weather where you are. It's like here in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana, I carry the responsibility with the Black Thunder Pipe to basically do ceremonies for anything that are part of the valley. It's a couple hundred miles up and down between mountains, and that's my responsibility. But as you get more experience with it, you may have the spirits tell you, do a ceremony to help with, for me, it would be like Oklahoma, where that's where the tornadoes are really, really bad. And sometimes I've been told to work on a hurricane, mainly around the United States. But as your experience grows, so does your responsibility to take on these things. And
Okay.
and so but what you need to do when you're talking to the spirits, just say, please speak to me, give me the instructions in a way that I can understand, because they can lower their language down to a level that we will understand, even though they're beings that have unlimited ability to communicate with the universe. But they understand we humans are limited in how we get communications. Now, as an example, my connection to spirit speaks to me a lot through birds of prey, hawks, buzzards, eagles, even ravens. By their actions and calls and how they're flying, I oftentimes get instructions on what I'm supposed to be doing with myself.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
that's my connection. Now, there's other people have connections to maybe non-nature related things. But there's always some way that spirit can reach to you at your level of understanding. So you don't have to try to hear it. You can just say, and it could be, well, we've got a class coming up. I really want to co-create with the spirits good weather that's be beneficial to the class. Now that might be being reined in the whole time, but it's okay for you to come. It's not necessarily a need, but you can start communicating and saying, fifth wind, thunder beings, whatever, and you'll know with the intuition within you as to who they are, what they are. And in reality, this is an important point. I've taught this to you before, Barbara. But in the Cherokee traditions, there's two ways that a human can influence calling rain. One is with working with the two thunderbirds. One is a red one and one's a blue one. And they're very powerful, and they work with lightning and thunder and storms. And I've even had them work with thunder in the middle of the winter here in Montana, where we had thunderstorms come in when I used the Black Thunder pipe in the middle of the winter. And I checked on the weather on the TV, on the Weather Channel, and they said, this is really unusual. We've got thunderstorms in the middle of the winter. Snow's falling. But then the other thing is the Cherokee use is a little tiny beetle about as big as my thumbnail. And it's called the thunder beetle because it can rub its hind legs together and make it sounds like a little crack. So it's kind of like thunder. But what you do is you turn the beetle over on its back and you spin it around slowly with a pencil and get it mad. And here's this little tiny thing, and it will bring rain, thunder, and lightning because it gets mad, and it has a signal that it sends up to the thunder beings and brings that. So here's the question: which is more powerful in creating rain, a little tiny beetle or the mighty thunder beings? They're both the same. They have the same source of power, which is not only the thunder beings and the cloud nation and grandmother ocean. It ultimately goes back to the great mystery, because that is the source of all these powers. So there is no limit to the abilities of these types of things. There's a video on my website, and for those of you that are watching this, it's www. All one word, World Tree Way. That's all one word, worldtreeway.com. There's a video, two videos there about working with pipe ceremonies with bring rain during droughts. And they're really short, but they're really cool. The people that made the videos, I had no idea they were actually, they were interviewing me and stuff, but it came out really neat. And if somebody wants to go to my website and search through there and find those two videos, one's in Australia and one's in Texas.
So this means when I work or want to get more in the work with the weather, now I know that I have the ability, and now they start to teach me and to train me.
Exactly.
So there will be messages that will come through, and I should listen to them and ask, what should I do?
Yep. And trust your first intuition, whatever pops into your mind, because you know how our mind works. Something pops into our mind, and that's the message from the spirits, or I call it the voice of God. And I don't use the word God a lot, but anyhow, it's a good description of that. And almost always, as soon as you have this first intuition, this first thought, the second one, which will be contrary to it or against it, pops into your head. Oh, that's silly. Why would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
That's our ego that argues with the voice of spirit.
I had now shortly the thought, oh, it would be so good to have a thunder pipe. And then my ego said, oh no, yeah, that's ego stuff. You don't need it. And what do you think? And all this.
Mhm.
My ego is just diminishing my things. So,
There's a definition I read a long time ago about ego. And no, it wasn't about ego, it was about humility. And we've dealt with that word in German a lot, but it means having the heart of a servant, uh, putting others not before yourself, but realizing that we have a responsibility to help others, just like you have a responsibility to help the weather around your area. And that's for everything. The rain is needed for the trees and the birds and everything. So it's not like just for people. That's what our ego would tell us, is it's just for people. But this definition of humility is really good. It's knowing how to acknowledge who and what you are not, and also acknowledging who and what you are. So there's a lot of people that I've trained to do healing work with their hands. And the ego in a person would say, oh, I'm a healer. Look at me, I'm special. But the ability to heal is something that you need to acknowledge. So if you are trained and you do have the ability, without ego, you can say, I am a healer. I'm a very good healer. I heal 70% of the people I work on. That's pretty darn good. A lot of doctors can't claim that. It's the same thing as if a doctor is trying not to, he's at a car wreck and he sees that he could help people, but he thinks, I'm not going to tell them I'm a doctor because they'll think I'm just all into myself and oh, look at me, I'm a doctor. So he doesn't say anything and the people are bleeding to death. It's totally appropriate for him to say, step back, I'm a doctor, I'll help. So that's just kind of an example of dealing with the ego. The ego is part of us and it has a purpose, just like anger, but it needs to be controlled just like anger and redirected. So and the ego often wants you not to become what you're called to be. So like when I did my first my vision quest to find out who I am and what I'm here to be, I was a young man and I was told you are a healer of healers and a teacher of teachers. And I thought immediately, oh, that's my ego. Oh my gosh, I can't be that. Who would, I would never claim that. Well, at the time, I wasn't a healer of healers and a teacher of teachers. I was just starting out, but that is what I do now in my life, my work, my calling. Those are the two main things that I do, and I don't have any problems in telling people that I'm not only a healer of healers and a teacher of teachers. I'm very good at both, and I have my own style, as Barbara knows.
okay. So, what is a big mistake, or what do I have to look for to avoid mistakes?
Well, first off, if you do a ceremony and the answer doesn't appear or nothing happens, that's not a mistake. It's a lesson. It's a learning. And oftentimes, the answer no is just as powerful as the answer yes. And I would say that there's two things that I've learned about doing ceremony with the weather, and it happens all the time. I need to have my sensitivity. I need to be sensitive to the cycles of nature. Because if I'm working with the weather, I'm working with nature. And I have like an inner voice that tells me when to start a ceremony. And oftentimes I'll be teaching and talking, and people will get on with the ceremony. But I wait until I feel the cycle come around to this point where the ceremony needs to start and will work. The other thing is well, that's the cycle of spirit or the spiritual realm, but then there's the cycle of nature, and they have to kind of come around together and meet. And that's where, when you do a ceremony for the weather, it meets you exactly where you said or where you started. I was doing a ceremony in Arizona in the fall, or maybe it was springtime, and it was really cold and it was blowing hard. This was up in the mountains, and some of the people didn't dress for it. They were really, I mean, getting bitter cold, and the wind was blowing so much I couldn't light the sage to start the ceremony. And I kept talking and teaching and waiting for the word to come, say, okay, start the ceremony now. And this is just something you have to learn by experience. You just trial and error, and you will recognize how it is that you realized when you should start the ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a woman there that was not from the area. I didn't know her at all. And I said, okay, I just got the word. We're to start the ceremony right now. And I said, but I can't light the sage. There's too much wind. So I turned around to the whole group and I said, well, so what do we do? And I pointed at this woman and says, what should we do? And she laughed and she said, we should ask the wind to stop. And I said, okay, go ahead. Now, I knew the wind was going to stop because I had felt the sense it's time to start the ceremony. But I purposely had her ask the spirits of the wind. She faced the wind and she says, wind, would you stop from blowing during our ceremony? And literally, it's like somebody turned off a switch. That hard wind just stopped, lit the sage, did the pipe ceremony. And then when we got done, we got ready to go have our feast. The wind came up again. So the point of that is it's the spirits that are directing the ceremony. And that's just more about just trusting your own intuition, and believing in that whatever it is that spirit uses to let you know that now is the time, or you should ask this or that. It all comes down to one main thing, and that's the ability to hear and communicate back and forth, to speak to the spirits and to hear from them. And again, they're the ones in charge, so it's up to them to speak to you so that you'll know. Now, with that being said, I was doing a ceremony here in Montana, and I was waiting to start the ceremony, and I said, well, I'm not getting a clear message that we should start the ceremony. I said, maybe I need to get hit in the head, tapped in the head. And this big blue dragonfly came up off the ground, flew right over and smacked me right in the forehead. And I said, well, I guess that's how they're talking to me. They're using a dragonfly. So, yeah. There's a lot more to learn. But these are the basics to get started.
Okay, super. Then I will pay attention to it. Here in our region, we have so much rain that it's really great for our plants and all this. But in other areas of Germany or Bavaria, there's a big drought. There's not enough.
Yeah.
So I will listen and ask and communicate to them that I'm here, and if they would need me, I will be with them and do the ceremonies.
My inclination is that all of Bavaria is your responsibility. And for those that you include in the ceremonies, you encourage them to say, where we live is where we have the effect. The Hopi, the rain affects all over the desert, but it comes specifically right to them. And when you and the women do the water song ceremony, I think that you're going to find that you can incorporate the weather into those ceremonies, and those women will grow into that as well. So, I mean, people want rain, so they call me and they say, oh, we need you to do a ceremony and do rain. And I say, well, give me 3 days to pray about it. And if I get a sign to do it, then I'll do it. But if I don't get a sign to do it, I won't do it, because the lack of rain is often a sign from spirit. It's speaking to the earth. But yeah, my hope is that if enough people are trained in working with the weather and they just adapt it to whatever their spiritual path is, it doesn't have to be a pipe or whatever. I kind of feel like there might be a network that could be really affecting the global weather in a positive way. Not that we're changing the weather to fit our desires, but that we're learning to listen to Mother Earth and what is she saying by these droughts and the sandstorms.
Mhm.
So, okay.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Okay, well, this will be continued. We'll have
Yeah.
lessons 2.0. All right. So I'm gonna turn this off,
Yeah.
end the meeting, and then you have a good evening.